lives. That's why we're in this situation now. We're in this situation with America and with Europe, and not because Americans and Europeans wouldn't treat us right or they separated from us. We're in this situation now because Europe and America attacked us and attached us to them against our will. Okay. So we had a movement that came into existence at a certain time because from the very beginning there was resistance to this relationship. We fought like hell. On the continent of Africa, we fought. We fought on in ships that we were cast in, brought here, and taken to various other places. We fought. We fought once we got to those places. That fight has never ended. That's what. When we're talking about the latest police killing, we're talking about that struggle just has never ended. And yet, even though that struggle has never ended, there is a sector of the population that continues to try to find a way to have rights within the system that's killing us, as opposed to ending the relationship that we have to the system that's killing us. And we're saying that's why it's important for us to have this study and understand this particular work and the significance of the African People's Socialist Party. Are not just differences of opinions, innocent difference of opinions. There are material interests associated with these ideological differences. There are groups of people, social forces, who have particular kind of relationship to the system that feeds them, that gives them a sense of prestige, that gives them relative privileges in relationship to the rest of the oppressed, that makes it possible for them to say that our children, my child is going to have this kind of education, et cetera, et cetera. They have a material interest. You understand? They have a material interest. They don't just disagree with us. They disagree with us because if we succeed, it means they lose their special place in this world of white man. They lose their special place if we succeed. Doesn't mean that they won't be better off than they are now. It means that they won't be specially better off. It means that Africans in general will be when we overthrow this relationship. But there's a group of us who've been given privileges as a consequence of the role that they play in maintaining the existing social system. That's why they educate a certain number of us so that we can play this role for them. That's why they allow a certain number of us to be successful and as individuals, but they won't allow the group to be successful. In order to maintain the group oppression, he understands better than anybody. And just like all of us know that there are certain things that you can do to get along with white people. If you want white people to like you better, everybody knows that. You know, if you want to get along with white people, if you want them to like you, etc., there are certain things that you do and you can benefit from that. And so when we look at the differences that we're talking about that express themselves ideologically, politically in the just innocent differences. These are differences that have at root a material basis. And even if some of the people who accept the ideology of oppression are working people, are from the working class, because they have united with a philosophy, an ideology, a politics that goes against their interests. These people can be won. They can transform. They can be changed because it's in their material interest to do something to fight for freedom. But there's a group of the leaders, the Darusans, the people who fit up inside the system and benefit from it. They can't be. You can't win them. You can win them at one point because they are people who will do anything for their own skins. But in terms of actually having been won, they can't be won. It's always going to unite with the ruling class. It's only individuals who can abandon combat boots and optional black beret. The rise of Jomo gave continuity to the southern-based black liberation movement in St. Petersburg and in some ways throughout the South and the U.S., even as SNCC was on the decline. The case of the party would play a similar role of maintaining continuity within the black revolution of the 60s, even after the revolutionary defeat. For although the black revolution of the 60s was defeated, Jomo was not, and it would play the major role in organizing the African People's Socialist Party. So what happened is, please mute your phone. Please mute. If you're not speaking, please mute because we can hear you and it disrupts the meeting. Please mute your phone. Please mute. Please mute your phone. You're disrupting the meeting.
No.
So what happened was much of the movement in the U.S., this is historical, by the way, was centered South. And the South, of course, is where slavery was concentrated, it wasn't the only place where Africans were enslaved in this country. Concentrated here, the greatest number of Africans, the dense population of Africans, the greatest kinds of resistance that was manifest, you could see that in the South. And so the South also is where the civil rights in Asia, in Africa. Now the United States is the main force, and it has all these raw materials coming into the United States. It has to have a way to transform these raw materials into finished products, and that is if the economy was going to grow, if they were going to be successful. And that meant that they needed Africans working in these damn factories. They couldn't, all this ooga booga stuff that the old white people in the South tried to hold on to about, privileges of white people, and this thing that was nigger work, we were only supposed to pick cotton, dig ditches, clear swamps, do all this other kind of nasty stuff, harvest, and grow and the farms, the crops. Now they needed us in these factories. And so the liberal sector, the white ruling class, promoted and supported the civil rights movement to make these changes. And that's much of what we were looking. So we saw this huge uprising. Africans, of course, we wanted to be able to have some modicum of freedom. We saw white people being free all around us. We were their servants in the most bestial way. Our wives and daughters were being raped on a regular basis. It's literally true that African people couldn't even see a future for your child. You got children who, from almost the moment they could walk, were literally, like working in fields. They were picking cotton. They were shucking peanuts and stuff like that. I've seen situations where little children who were barely out of their diapers were working like in fields, especially if you talk about peanuts and, just covered in sand from shucking peanuts and stuff like this. This is what we had. And there was no African family could reasonably expect that their child and their child and their child was going to have any different kind of future than this. This is the stuff that we were stuck in. And so this is where much of the resistance grew. And Africans were literally, can somebody tell me what this is? This sound that I keep getting on the phone. What is this? So we would have a situation where Africans would literally escape from the South. They would literally have to escape. They'd have to leave a city in the middle of the night. They would try to hop on a freight train or something, get out of there. They would leave that town in the middle of the night, walking through the woods, etc., to get to another town because the white man in this particular town knew you were supposed to be there. And if you left, that was going to mean the crops couldn't get in. That was going to mean all kinds of problems for the white man. So literally, it was a desperate situation for African people. And you had this whole body of white capital that required nigger work, and people stuck on these plantations and doing the dirty, backbreaking work that white people were never expected to do. And you had a whole philosophy that was organized around why Africans ought to do this, why Africans shouldn't be here, shouldn't sit there, shouldn't stand there. That required, first of all, a sense of white supremacy in the head of white people. White people believed that they were superior and supreme, and this was a natural order way. And the Africans ourselves now have been destroyed of any kind of self-confidence that in ourselves. It was a very cruel and difficult situation that's in some ways not very different from today. When you look at the communities that we live in today, where African young people expect to die young, expect to go to prison, they expect this. This is not like, maybe they expect they're going to go to prison, they expect to meet their homies when they go to prison. There are different prisons all around this country where there are sections in the prison that you can find Africans from different cities who hang out with each other because the neighborhood is gone. What happened to the neighborhood that's in prison? You go to prison, you want to be with your homies and stuff like that. That's an ordinary way. And so in the South, you saw a really concentrated kind of resistance. And that's where, the whole right to vote questions and the right trying to stop crackers from lynching black people and just murdering us, the federal government wouldn't do it. This was a regular thing that happened. White people get upset for any reason, just would come out, snatch an African, dismember the African, drag the African through the streets, blow him away, burn him, and this became a holiday kind of a thing, and the federal government wouldn't stop it. So this is what we were confronted with. And so it's natural that the so-called civil rights movement would emerge in the South. So you had Africans who didn't want to live like this. And then you had liberal white capitalists who needed Africans to function in another way inside the society. And so the movement started in the South. Civil rights, voting rights and stuff like that. But by 1965, both civil rights bill and voting rights act had been achieved. So the basic struggles for democracy, for civil rights, as far as the petty bourgeoisie, the black middle class, it had been achieved. It had been won, basically. And in fact, it made the civil rights movement kind of redundant. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee now seeing this manifestation, like, for example, what happened was the Black Panther Party that became the real water carrier of the 1960s, it took its name from the Lowndes County, Alabama, where African people were involved in civil rights movement. And what you saw then was a shift, a clear kind of shift of the movement, because the civil rights, what are you going to do now? You got your Voting Rights Act, you got your civil rights bill, etc. So what is the movement going to do now? And what happened is that we saw concentrated in the North, in places like, and of course, Malcolm X is already condemning this whole civil rights movement, its tactics, its strategies, its philosophy, etc. And then you see the Black Panther Party emerges in California, and JOMO emerged here in the city of St. Petersburg, and it worked in certain other parts of the South in particular. So you had these phenomena, and it was the way that the movement moved beyond civil rights movement, which was basically a Southern-based kind of thing, and it graduated to this whole struggle for against colonialism. Because if you got civil rights, then what the hell are you still fighting for, right? What are you still fighting for? And so you had this movement toward against colonialism, and JOMO was a critical force in propelling and keeping the anti-colonial movement alive in the South, giving it shape and form, and then and in many ways throughout the United States. So it was, we say, the rise of JOMO gave continuity to the Southern-based Black liberation movement in St. Petersburg, in some ways throughout the South and the U.S., even as SNCC was on the decline. We say the decline, SNCC was being attacked, and very seriously. It started off being a part of the civil rights movement. Everybody could support, all of white liberals who loved African people participating in the system could support SNCC. SNCC was organization of particularly young African people who were courageous, who were bold, who would go into the South, who would raise up the whole philosophy of loving everybody and et cetera, et cetera. And then SNCC moved forward. And it was tremendously influenced by Malcolm X. It was also influenced by revolutionary struggles happening everywhere around the world. SNCC was going to Africa. SNCC was running in, and was introducing itself and others to Frantz Fanon and what Fanon was saying, who was part of the Algerian Revolution. SNCC was the one who was able to say "Not yet Uhuru" when they talked about and made up a song about Udinga Ojinga at the time, who was somebody who opposed Jomo Kenyatta, who was a sellout that people didn't understand at that moment. So SNCC played a really important role in that, and it came under assault. It came out, it was the first organization to unite with the Vietnamese people. It came out against the war in Vietnam in a very serious way. It wasn't no pacifist, bring the boys home kind of stuff. SNCC, put forth the slogan, "Hell no, we won't go." In terms of Vietnam, they were drafting people. SNCC said, "Hell no, we won't go," and took that to the African population. And SNCC is the one that actually came up in support of the Palestinian struggle. And all the Jewish organizations around the world took their money from SNCC. SNCC had been relying on money from liberal whites, and they took their money from SNCC when SNCC took this position. So you had as a consequence of that, SNCC had no cars. They're in Mississippi. They're fighting worst kinds of circumstances. These white people took their money, took their cars, and then the government began to frame SNCC up. I met a brother just 2 or 3 months ago in Philadelphia, or he may have been in New York, who was in Philadelphia when SNCC was charged with having bombs in its office that it was going to be using against white people or the government or something like that. And SNCC came under serious kind of assault. And at the time, and so when we talk about SNCC being in decline, we're talking about the war that was being made against SNCC by the federal government, the fact that all the civil rights movements organizations abandoned SNCC because it took an anti-colonial stance and what have you, and the fact that the movement had achieved a decidedly anti-colonial movement as opposed to a civil rights kind of movement. And SNCC helped to introduce that anti-colonial movement to the world. So in a 1978 interview by the Brennan Spear, let me see, yeah. The rise of Jomo gave continuity to the Southern-based Black liberation movement, St. Petersburg in some ways throughout the South and the US, even as SNCC was on the decline. The rise of the party would play a similar role of maintaining continuity within the Black revolution of the 60s, even after the revolution's defeat. For although the Black revolution of the 60s was defeated, Jomo was not, and it would play the major role in organizing the African People's Socialist Party. In a 1978 interview by the Brennan Spear, I summed up the period now being discussed and the significance of the ongoing political work, first by Jomo and then our party, during and subsequent to the counterinsurgency terror and the defeat of the Black revolution of the 60s. I think an understanding of this era and the relationship of our party to it demands we risk redundancy with this rather extensive excerpt from that 1978 interview, and I'm quoting now. There were bombings, beatings, lynchings, and virtually every imaginable kind of terror directed at this movement to no avail. The struggle for democratic rights was basically successful and led to certain restrictions being placed on the brutal colonialist power of the state, making certain acts illegal through the passage of various civil rights acts. If we arbitrarily start this period with the arrest of Rosa Parks in 1954, I think we are discussing a period of struggle from that point, which lasted more than 10 years until the advent of the Black Power movement, which we can give an arbitrary beginning a year of 1966. I have used the term arbitrary for the dates of the two aspects of the period I'm talking about because it is clear that historical periods cannot be so clearly defined as to be given exact dates. And though Rosa Parks' Act led to an upsurge of activity in Montgomery, Alabama in 1954, we know there was struggle prior to then. The same thing is true with the Black Power era, which we give the beginning year as 1966. Even earlier than that, a sector of the Black liberation movement was articulating Black Power politics. Malcolm X is the most obvious leader of that articulation, and his thoughts were beginning to influence a sector of the Black liberation movement. In fact, I think there was a rather primitive popular armed rebellion in Jacksonville, Florida in 1964 or 1965, and another in 1965 in Watts, right here in California. So we have to say that when we give certain dates to characterize historical periods, the most we are attempting to do is give a date when a particular period manifested itself most sharply, most definitively, most completely. But anyway, it was on the back of the mostly Southern-based struggle for democratic rights that the Black Power aspect of the period we are connected with came into being. So it was a thunderous birth, propelled by the momentum already existing from the civil rights movement. It didn't take long to see that the Black Power movement gave a different character to the Black liberation movement, changing its posture from defensive to offensive. All over this country, rebellions were popping up and Black people were setting city after city to the torch. When we say that the movement moved from a defensive posture. We're talking about from that civil rights period. See, before the civil rights period, what was the most definitive struggle that we could identify with happening in this country? What was that before the civil rights movement? That was Garvey. Garvey wasn't a movement of defensiveness. It wasn't saying, oh, give us some rights, boss, let us have this and that. Garvey was building our own. He was developing steamship lines. He was developing governmental forms. He was developing features of the African nation. He was organizing all around the world. And it was a time when you saw real declaration of where we were going. This is our agenda. In fact, in 1920, at the convention of the Negro peoples of the world that happened in New York, a declaration of the rights of the Negro peoples of the world was put forth by the Garvey movement. That was an incredible period. So now what happens is, with the destruction of the Garvey movement, the United States government overthrew it, destroyed it, did everything, sent in spies, used people like Du Bois, used all kinds of other forces, and criminalized that movement and put Garvey in prison, kicked him out of the country. So they destroyed the offensive. This was a movement, this was not a defensive posture. Garvey had assumed the offensive, taking us to the place that we needed to go. But when the Garvey movement was defeated, and we saw the rise of neo-colonial forces like the NAACP, like the Pan-Africanist movement, and all these other social forces, the middle-class petty bourgeois social forces. And then the movement no longer had an offensive posture because these Negroes didn't want anything other than to be accepted by white power and to integrate into the white people's situation. So it was a defensive movement that we were looking at that time. So it took the struggle, I'm back on page 23, it took the struggle for democratic rights to solve certain problems in the Black movement. The struggle for democratic rights gave us more mobility, making it possible to have public meetings, engage in certain kinds of political activities, etc. It also equalized the struggles of African people in the southern and northern US by smashing the most fundamental oppression that gave struggle in the different geographical areas its particular character. You with me on that? So now, as opposed to Negroes in the north supporting their brothers and sisters in the south, while they were still catching hell in the north, the movement was equalized in the sense that now all of us, engaged in the struggle against colonialism, and there is no this great distinction as such. I mean, of course, distinctions continue to exist. Right now, there are places in the South. This is true right now as we have this discussion. There are places in the southern parts of the United States where Africans are treated just like in apartheid South Africa. Palestinians are treated like they're in occupied Palestine. So during the civil rights, when we did work around Desi Woods, for example, this was much later. I mean, this was some time ago, but in the 1970s, when we were doing work around Desi Woods, we went to places like Hawkinsville, Georgia, where white people still had their own private jails. You understand what I'm saying? I'm talking about the white man had a jail on his property that they locked African people up. So this stuff still happens in this country even today. So during the civil rights movement, we were mostly talking about a Southern phenomenon. However, when we began to talk about Black power, it was a political articulation that had significance throughout every geographical sector of the US and even in Africa. So now we're on the same page, more or less, Africans. The advent of the Black Power movement in the US spelled the ideological and political defeat of US colonialism within its borders. The advent of Black Power, of the Black Power movement in the United States spelled the ideological and political defeat of US colonialism within its borders. You have to remember that the most positive ideas we have about ourselves as Africans today were the ones given birth during the Black Power period. And that's true for anybody who is not an African internationalist, for anybody who is not a part of this movement and have been shaping and forging a new history. When you think about the most positive images that we have of African people, it's back to the 1960s. That's why everybody goes get a Panther, get a Black Power, et cetera, et cetera. So even Uncle Toms do that. Even people who were against Black Power do that. So the ideology of white supremacy fell before the concepts of Black Power and slogans like Black is beautiful. Black people began to set up various independent institutions, freedom schools, political parties, self-help organizations, etc. Perhaps one of colonialism's biggest defeats was the ideological defeat of pacifism or philosophical nonviolence within the U.S. African colony. Pacifism and philosophical nonviolence, which is something that's attempt is being made to reintroduce that into our communities, even by most militant, articulate, young, forces. This political defeat resulted in fierce resistance against popular white attacks on Black people, bringing them to a screeching halt as the general tool for political repression of the African colony. Up until now, just ordinary white people carry out the mission. They come into your house at night, terrorize you. Like with Emmett Till, they came to his grandfather's house in the middle of the night, took this 15-year-old child out and killed him because they said he whistled at a white woman. And it was white people. It wasn't the police. You didn't have to have the police. The white people held you till the police got there, if they wanted you alive, etc. This is so you saw that this was brought to a screeching halt with the Black Power movement, and this made it necessary for the capitalist colonialist state to rear its head. So the state itself, as the state, had to begin to express itself when African people stood up and started fighting back and say, if you bring something over here, cracker, it's gonna take something to get something. That we will fix it up for you. And so this brought all of that stuff of random attacks by white people. They don't happen in the same way anymore because they would mean retaliation. African people were fought back because there was a philosophical defeat for nonviolence, for philosophical nonviolence. That was gone. And so this made it necessary for the capitalist colonial state to rear its head with military organizations like SWAT and STRESS. These were particular kinds of military organizations. You should know that Black Power was a concept that mobilized the thousands of Africans throughout this country. The concept itself flowed. You should know that while Black Power was a concept that mobilized the thousands of Africans throughout this country, the concept itself flowed from the anti-colonial politic. And although it was not clearly understood at the time, independent power for Black people could only mean political independence. Independent power for Black people could only mean political independence. And of course, a struggle against colonialism is a struggle for political independence. What else can it be? Now, I'm saying this, but we work with people who say that they're struggling against colonialism right now, but they don't believe in independence. They really want a peace where they can have their own little Black enclaves or something like that. There's a way that we can define. And some of them are militant and very clever people. That's why they're not building organizations to take power. Because if you believe that you're fighting against colonialism, you don't just want to keep the white man from doing something bad every time he tries to do something. You want to have a power of your own. And that's how we organize. And that's why most of what we do is so different from what a lot of other forces would do. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Hunter Militant Organizations, the Black Panther Party, and the Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, were some of the organizations which, under the ideological influence of Malcolm X, articulated very clear anti-colonial politics. It was essentially anti-colonialist politics and the concomitant ideological articulations that defeated colonialism within U.S. borders, and we mean ideologically and politically. Now, what is the capitalist colonialist ruling class and state going to do in the face of this ideological and political defeat? Can they simply accede, defeat, and hope for better luck the next time? Of course not. African colonialism within the U.S. is very profitable, both economically and politically. Moreover, the entire internal U.S. imperialist structure rests upon our subjugation. And not only were we struggling against colonialism, but the example of our anti-colonial struggle set other subject peoples in greater motion. The Puerto Rican movement escalated, throwing groups like the Young Lords into direct confrontation with U.S. colonialism. The same happened with the Mexican Chicano movement. Then the struggle against colonialism within the U.S. was another important factor that made it difficult for the U.S. to effectively deploy all its troops to Vietnam. To understand this, one must remember the use of federal troops against Black people in Detroit in 1968, and the military tanks used to encircle the White House after the U.S. government murdered Martin Luther King, because African people rose up in Washington, D.C. and throughout this country. And it frightened them so much that they literally had tanks surrounding the White House. This is why they're emptying out Washington, D.C. now. That's why the massive, what they call gentrification, is happening in Washington, D.C., because it's a security problem for the capital of the United States to have been sitting in a city that was 70, 80% African. It ain't just because they want your property, they that too. But the fact is, if you had to have been there to see when the rebellions broke out after the murder of King, they had to have no tanks surrounding the White House because of fear of African people, not Saddam Hussein, not ISIS or something like that, but African people in this country they were afraid of. So the U.S. capitalist colonialist class and state could not very well afford to turn its back on this ideological and political defeat dealt to them by our anti-colonialist movement. Therefore, they moved the only way left open to them, militarily. We now know of one aspect of this military assault, the program called COINTELPRO. Although as violent as that assault was, I am convinced that it was only one small part of the entire military operation. In any event, revolutionary nationalists were assassinated and jailed throughout the U.S. It was a military assault our movement had not really anticipated. Now, instead of newspaper headlines of Africans setting the torch to city after city, we began to read of more and more attacks, more and more Blacks murdered by U.S. cops and FBI agents all over the place. Those escaping actual assassination were thrown into dungeons throughout the U.S. This was a period when I was in and out of prison. It was also a period when we would discover the true mettle of the various Black organizations and leaders of our movement. Some forces were chased into exile, clinging to their lives and liberty by the skin of their teeth. Some attempted to launch a military counter-assault. Forces like the Black Liberation Army. Others decided, in the face of the military assault, that the struggle was much more complex than they thought. These forces and persons either went into voluntary exile to study or went into the woodwork inside the country to do some studying. And of course, Stokely Carmichael, my man, my partner, my dog, was one of them who discovered that they had to go study too. And he got the hell out and went into Ghana, Kwame Ture. During this period, I was chairman of an organization called JOMO, based in several cities in Florida and Louisville and Lexington, Kentucky. We were also under assault. I just mentioned my personal imprisonment, but I was not the only one. There were scores of others, many of them in prison today. One difference with JOMO, though, was that although we began to take various security precautions and transform our work style to meet the military assault, we never entirely went underground nor did we quit struggling to study. Consequently, we maintained constant links with the master. There was never a break in the continuity of our development, nor in the development of our anti-colonial politics. So although we see many forces today who have apparently studied enough to rejoin the struggle, most of them simply attempt to apply their newfound understanding to the old situation of the 1960s, as the movement was when they left it. Therefore, their theory and politics have no vitality. They are dead, mechanical, and one-sided. On the other hand, as a result of our continuous attempt to solve the pressing problems of our movement and our people, our theory, ideology, and political line have a more intimate relationship to reality and therefore more vitality, I believe. They were shaped, forged, and determined by the struggle of the people. When the military assault on our movement was followed by the ideological and political mop-up operations by the so-called new left ideological imperialists, who our party called Ku Klux Communists, Jomo and the African People's Socialist Party were the only ones I'm aware of which took them on ideologically and politically. We began a public ideological struggle with the October League, now called the Communist Party Marxist-Leninists, that doesn't exist anymore, through the Brennan Spear as early as 1973, less than a year after Jomo initiated the founding of the African People's Socialist Party. There was the October League, and there was the Revolutionary Union, which is now known as the Revolutionary Communist Party, led by this white guy, Bob Avakian, who started his political career in Oakland, California, following the Black Panther Party around, whose father was a judge there and who was in voluntary exile for some time living in Paris, France. But we fought them all. We defeated the ideological league politically and ideologically in several important struggles in Florida, Kentucky, and Georgia, and reported on these struggles in the Spear so other political forces throughout the country could learn from them. Of course, our ideology and politics sharpened as a result of this struggle, as these reactionaries were all well read, and it could no longer suffice to say black is beautiful, etc., in response to their ideological assaults. I'm convinced that the ideological and political struggles initiated by our party against these forces is the primary fundamental reason for their defeat throughout the US. This then is one area of responsibility for aiding the resurrection of the pro-independence movement that our party accepts the defeat of the ideological imperialists, and I should say temporary. Another related area of responsibility we accept is the deepening of the theoretical and ideological basis of the pro-independence movement. After the military defeat of our movement by the US government, our movement has necessarily suffered an ideological stagnation, which was transformed into ideological confusion with the attack by the ideological imperialists. And as our theory and ideology were reflected in our line, while doing struggle around various issues in this country, we were able to contribute to keeping the entire movement alive and demonstrate the application of pro-independence theory to practical problems. We found ourselves faced with a movement now attempting to resurrect itself, partially on the basis of much of our contributions. I believe, but without a strategy. Therefore, our party took it upon itself, putting forth a strategy for liberation, one that is being talked about and accepted in various forms by different forces throughout the entire US. It is in connection with that strategy that we have made the case of Desi Woods, one of the most significant political cases in the country, a case where we have deliberately set out to reveal the general conditions of colonialism hidden in the particular attack on Desi Woods. Today, thousands of people throughout the current US borders have a direct or indirect relationship with the Desi Woods case, a case which quite deliberately attempts to win people to an understanding of colonialism and to the support of our struggle. Our struggle is also responsible for our party organizing the African People's Solidarity Committee, an organization of North American progressives whose primary role is to struggle within the white community winning the progressive left and the general North American working class to support for our anti-colonial politics through winning them to a hatred of capitalism and a need for socialist revolution. Uhuru. So that is that, and I want to talk about this, but first let's look and see who do we have with us. I know there's who is on the call whose name I did not call. Fofi.
Sam.
I got you, Sam.
Uhuru is Brian.
Brian, Uhuru. Anyone else?
Uhuru is Ruby.
Ruby. Anybody else?
Uhuru Kalonda.
Who? Kalunda. Anybody else?
Uhuru Abraham.
Uhuru Badori.
Fedori?
Brodori.
Brodori.
Yes, sir.
We did this before, didn't we?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, Lisa's online.
Okay. So I want to open it up and let's talk about what we just read. Did we mute them? Nobody's muted, right?
No.
So K Fing, as I would imagine you have some observations.
Yeah, I do. Especially the continuation. I'm particularly remembering Huey P. Newton and Desi Woods and yourself on the same
and thousands of people were won to participating in that because the party showed them how they could see their own political interest in that kind of struggle. We rebuilt. If there's anything that looks like a movement in Oakland and much of California, it's a consequence of what we've done directly. And in Philadelphia, when they bombed Move, it was an assault not just on that handful of people. They're dropping a bomb, destroyed 60 some odd houses, killed 11 people, children, women, men, etc., entire neighborhood. It was an attack to tell everybody in Philadelphia and Africans around the country that this is what awaits you. And we went directly into Philadelphia. We were there the next year with the slogan, "Reinforcements are on the way," and went into Philadelphia, and we built a movement in Philadelphia. We're there in Philadelphia now. One of our most important institutions is in Philadelphia, the Uhuru Furniture Store. And in various places around the South, where SNCC and the Civil Rights Movement are now gone, but the party was there. We were in Georgia. We confronted them there, confronted them throughout the state of Florida, confronted them in Kentucky and various other kinds of places. So that's part of what we mean. And even if some people have convenient amnesia and have forgotten the role that we played, it's important for us in the African People's Socialist Party to understand that. So we took back ideological and political and even geographical terrain for our struggle. And people, who are able to preen on the political stage today can do so in part because of the work that the party has done. Anybody else?
I mean, you mentioned the kidnapping of Ben, putting him in the crazy house.
Yeah, brother, we took from here into Louisville, Kentucky, and he was actually kidnapped. And they kidnapped him and took him to some kind of institution. And he said there were these, I think he said there were Asians mostly who actually, they doped him up and he had to be physically rescued. People had to break into the damn joint and get him out of there, So any other comments, comrades? Nothing? Uhuru Louise. Yes, comrade. Louise is calling us out of London. Yes, comrade.
Yeah, just appreciative I am about this political education. And then the topic itself is profound because the work on keeping the Black revolution alive helped me definitely to grapple with the questions left unresolved, basically, because the question of nobody talks about building a revolutionary party. Everybody talks about the rule of law, alternative, democratic alternative, stuff like that. And what the party did, if you put the question of the revolutionary party in the middle, we didn't build a party, and that was that's no result. You should look at the 60s, after the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba, the people at Mulele that began to grapple with the question of the party, of the workers and the peasants, and what type of party that would be. When they died, he didn't even resolve it, but he just recognized we need to build a revolutionary party. How does it look like, and things like that. So the work of the chairman was the first work that I saw that spoke to the Africans. Basically, you need to build a revolutionary party, a new type of party, and they're giving definition how it should look like. So keeping the Black revolution alive definitely spoke to that missing gap for those of us who grew up after Africans became independent. You couldn't explain why we celebrating independence and things are so bad because the revolution was defeated and nobody was talking about it. It was something in the books you can read about the Chinese, the Russian Revolution, but no one talks about the Black Revolution, that there was one. Mm. And that was really profound, just to get back into your own history. Why? So that's how it was. So that was a lot of clarity. And all the subsequent struggles with the white legs, which we have to contain in Europe most of the time, and knowing that struggle was made by an African under new philosophy. I mean, that was just so profound, so refreshing to know why that's how you deal with these forces. Because when you live in Paris, you see them all the time. That's why they come on Saturday and Sunday looking for come to teach us. Tell us what to do, things like that. Now the question of why solidarity, and just the question about and the theory. More just we profound. We allow you to look at what happened in the 60s around the world, in Africa in particular, and basically gives you proper bearings, so you know now you can distinguish between when white people talk about revolution and when opportunism raises the head and go all at once and look at those spaces. They pretend to make a revolution when reality it didn't happen. So after working classes in the center, nobody puts them in the center at all. Even today, nobody put them in the center. That's the first time you really came across somebody who was saying that workers must lead their own revolution, and that was it gave me renewed confidence, and say, yeah, that's what needs to be done. That's what needs to be done. So it was really, it was good. So I just want to say that.
Uhuru. I think Uhuru, yes. Yes.
You were going to comment. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that I think what Louise just mentioned is really important, because you can read about revolutionary struggles that's happening all over the world historically. You can go and find the Chinese Revolution, the Russian Revolution, you can find all this stuff, but the Black Revolution, the African Revolution, it's hard to find a summation, and we have provided that. And not only have we provided it, it's not just a matter of talking about on such and such a date, this happened, such and such. We actually establish a method of seeing history and the role that our struggle has played in history, and even in the emergence of capitalism itself. And that's what is really important. I agree with Comrade Louise. This is the stuff that we've done and continue to do even up to date. We give an actual foundation for the so-called, for the African Revolution. I mean, you see people who are doing stuff today, but there is no foundation. They can't say that they're doing it because it represents some historical continuum, that it's responding to how we got to be in the situation we are in. They can talk militantly about how the police kill us and we ought to block a highway or something like that, but they can't place that relationship we have to the police and the damn highway into some kind of historical context. They show that what is happening to us is part of a continuum. They can talk to us about the numbers of Africans just died in the last boat that they tried to crawl in to try to use to get across the Mediterranean, escaping the horror and terror of being Black people and on the mother continent itself. But they can't tell you how any of this stuff started, what's the basis of it, and what's the relationship to condition of African people and to the wealth and well-being of others. And I want to say something about that. Newsweek, I think, is this issue of Newsweek came out with an interesting cover story. It's on the front page, something about this is your brain on poverty. And it purports to be a real scientific piece of work. And it uses scientific terminology and what have you. It talks about studies where they've actually connected electrodes to people's heads so they can see their brain doing certain stuff when they are faced with certain kind of stimuli. And what they have discovered, in quotes, is that people who grow up in extreme poverty and violence, the gray matter in particular areas of the brain do not develop. Areas that have to do with judgment and other kinds of stuff, they do not develop appropriately. And what they are doing, I haven't read the entire thing, but I've read enough to see what they're doing is giving a biological explanation for how we act, for how we respond to different things in the world. And while they're not saying it, what they're doing clearly is using when they talk about the brain and what's normal about the brain. And if the brain is a certain way when you're poor, then what they're using as a template is white people's brain. Yeah. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. The template is white people's brain, which means the tiny minority of the world, they're using that as the template. And it seems to me, if white people's brains are this way and they're the minority, that theirs is probably the abnormal brain. You know, if you gotta use that kind of stuff, and it purports to be like some profound, you know, like scientific, you know, discovery. I mean, you're talking about a situation where even white folks are able to say that 80% of people on Earth are trying to survive off less than $10 US a day, and 50% of less than $2.50 a day. And Africans sometimes only have a meal a day to try to live off for less than $1 a day. So they're saying that if people who experience extreme poverty and live in violence and stuff like that, our brain somehow doesn't develop appropriately, and it doesn't achieve the kind of gray matter. And you know that gray matter that they're using on those other brains, that's fat. That's fat as a consequence of resource theft and stuff like that. But the basic point I'm making is that if you do not have the advantage of a genuine African internationalist worldview, the science of historical materialism, if you don't have the advantage of that, then you end up with a biological, which is what they want to give, a biological assessment for why people act a certain way. They liquidate the social and economic basis for that, the foundation for that, even for the existence of violence. They liquidate all of that. Anyway, anybody else?
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru.
This is Otika.
Yes, Otika.
I apologize for the noise in the background. I'm on a plantation right
Okay.
now, but I want to ask you about, well, first of all, you talk a lot about how the Black Revolution in the 60s was crushed. Can you speak on the process and the struggle, like to keep it alive, and where the party was, you know, while this was going on? I know you kind of like go into that every now and then, but I struggle to kind of talk to the African working class about where the party was, how the party was able to, you know, and the movement itself was able to stay alive and to stay afloat, you know, during this time, you know, because I know, you know, we were influential with, you know, reparations and stuff like that, but, you know, can you kind of like further explain that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's one that, you know, is going to require a lot more discussion. But one of the things that we did early on as a party is we really worked early on in terms of developing our theory, the ideology of the party. And you can go back a long time where we were struggling around questions of colonialism, and we've been grappling and teasing with the question of what they refer to as primitive accumulation, et cetera, really working and developing that and understanding the theory. And the reason I put forth theory is because that's the only thing that gives you the long view. You have to be able to see the end of the road. You know, if you look at, I used to use an example because I used to run a lot. And if you notice that the best long distance runners come from the continent of Africa, and yet you will find an African from here, from Jamaica, are the best sprinters in the world. Now, how in the hell, I mean, we got the same DNA. So how in the hell is somebody from Kenya able to run a long distance faster than anybody, and somebody from here or from Jamaica, something like that, runs short distances, you know? And part of that is because the ones who are running short distances, they can see the end of the line. You understand? You can see the end of the road. You have to have the long view in order to be able to pursue something for long periods of time. And at least in Kenya, and no matter how backwards and horrible things are on the continent of Africa, Ethiopia is another place. that there is an assumption that if you reach a certain class status there, that you can actually be in charge, that you can actually do something. So there is an ability to see, to have a long view. I believe, I'm convinced of that. The basic point that I wanted to make, and because, you know, I mean, you get a cat here. I mean, who can outrun Usain Bolt? You know, until you start talking about, you know, 26 point something miles. You know, then that makes the difference. And then you got somebody from Kenya who can do that. I think being able to see the long view is one critical thing, Oteka, no matter how bad the analogy I used just now may have been, but I think being able to see the long view. And I think also, and that's tied to ideology, to philosophy. And I think also tied to ideology and philosophy is the assumption that the people are the real makers of history. And as important as we may be as individuals in the party, it's our relationship to the people. The people are the ones who are going to make this damn thing happen. And so what has happened at different times in our history, when it appeared that the party may not have even been on the ground, we were on the ground. We might not have been on the ground as the African People's Socialist Party. We might have been up inside the organization that we created in this city, St. Petersburg, for example, that made all kinds of struggle around housing. You know, we were up in that. The housing thing was a thing that was African people were being affected by in a very serious way. And we used the struggle against housing that Africans were involved in. And our name may have been, I've forgotten what the name of the housing organization we created, but it was us who were in that. There was the party who was alive in that organization. It was a party, when we did the National Committee to Free Desert Woods, it wasn't just the African People's Social Party. Everybody knew we were leading that, but it was the National Committee. The party organized masses of people to participate in this thing. So even when we're doing the Black Community Control of Police, Black Panther Party at one juncture talked about Black community control of the police, and it initiated something. Didn't last, didn't even work that long on it for whatever reasons. But when we talk about Black community control of the police, it's not ours. The thing is, it has to be won by masses of people. Masses of people have to put their signatures on it, have to unite with it. It becomes a campaign of the people. And I think that's one of the things that's made it very, made us be able to exist when others didn't. And I'll tell you one other thing too, and I want to overlook this, and that is the creation of the African People's Solidarity Committee. And why was that important? It was important because one of the first things that white power does, as you can see it doing all around the world, when it wants to deal with Venezuela and it can't fight Venezuela militarily, what does it do? Somebody say, come on, what has it done to Venezuela? We're not keeping up with stuff. It's try to starve them to death, isolate them economically. What do they do with Iran? Try to starve it, isolate them economically. What were you saying?
Yeah, they're starving in Yemen.
In Yemen, they do the same thing everywhere they can. They will starve you out. And so they will deprive us of an ability to attain resources. Who got most of the resources in the world? Who got them? I ain't talking about who's, huh? White people got them. Almost everything that's of value is in some white community somewhere. In your town, in Europe, or someplace. And so the creation of the African People's Solidarity Committee was an important thing for us. It was important for that reason, because I want those resources. We needed those resources. We still need those resources when everything else was drying up and dying around us. And the white people didn't do this. I did that. And because people raise the question of, well, do you trust the white people? It doesn't matter trusting the white people. I don't trust you either. I don't have a relationship based on trust. I have a relationship based on a strategy. And that's what it is that we have done. We've created a strategy and we can check it. We can see, just like white people don't hire you in the bank as a teller because they trust you. In fact, they might not trust you at all, but they know when something's missing and they know who to go to and what to do to you and that kind of stuff. So I think that was one of the important things, important for the reasons of attaining the resources to keep, to develop our machinery, and everything that we have gotten from that, we own it. They own it, we own it. It's ours. Just like everything that we created, they own it, right? Now they create, we own it, it's ours, etc. And that's really important. But another important thing is it also helps to deny the white ruling class the absolute unity of the white population. So there's a sector of the white population that's constantly working all the time. First of all, to provide solidarity with us. In fact, this next month, maybe even early this month, but certainly next month, we're looking at African People Solidarity Committee things. They in solidarity with African people, that they organize everything. The thing is to not be isolated. Do you understand? So it's not just us, but continuously to build solidarity, support of all forces, not just even with the white people. That's a critical component of it, because the most dynamic relationship that exists inside this country is that which exists between white people and black people. I know Mexican people catch hell. I know a whole bunch, but the white people and black people question, that's the question. And we've tapped into that in a very serious kind of way. And that has played a role also in terms of the parties being able to make it. So the party is in many different places all the time. The party is doing work in the white community, white power, black power, and white face. The party is doing work in different places in Africa through development programs that we have. And in this country, the party has created economic institutions to keep us afloat too, because we take the resources we get from the solidarity and we put them into our own institutions. So they can't starve us, not easily. They can, of course, not easily. And even with these institutions, we build broad-based support. So that right now, for example, in the city of St. Petersburg, where there's the African marketplace. I mean, there's a marketplace, this out there Saturday market. And we are in the Saturday market. Go to our stall in the Saturday market. And what you see is this whole banner up there saying the solidarity with African self-determination, that kind of stuff. They promote that. So it's constantly something that's winning support and solidarity for our struggle all the time, and not allowing ourselves to be isolated and etc. We are moving beyond. One of the things that we've done, Oteka, and we've always struggled for it, is to move beyond this whole era of the charismatic leader, which is not to say that y'all ain't got charisma, because I know y'all charismatic as hell. But the fact is that we don't have organization based on charisma. We build structures, we build institutions, we create an actual capacity that goes beyond. So even if our leadership is dull and boring, we've got a machine that carries out the function that it's supposed to carry out, whether it's bold and daring and charismatic or otherwise. That's, I'm probably over talked it and may not have even answered your question, Oteka.
Uhuru, Chairman, I think you did a great job. I did, yeah. I unite with that as well.
Uhuru. And let me say this before you say anything, comrade. One of the things that we recognized a long time ago is the ideological weakness of our whole movement. I say our movement, I'm talking about the whole black movement. I'm talking about not the Uncle Tom sect. I'm not talking about this NAACP Negroes or anything like that. But those of us who actually want to be genuinely free, want to be able to set the terms for our relationship to the world and to each other, and the ideological weakness. Because you don't win this struggle by just talking bad about the white man. That's not enough. We've got to win this debate, and so that in the heads of our supporters, they got to be able to see the logic of what we're talking about. We make the argument with them, because you got to convince your mama, because your mama backwards. But you got to convince your mama, this is it, mama, this is why. And you got to win her, and you got to also convince your enemy. Your enemy must be forced to lose confidence in his position, in his ideological and political position, destroy his confidence in it by argument, by being able to win it. And we define our enemies for the enemy. This is one of the most important things in the 1960s. When you saw the 1960s, these young Africans out there with the Black Panther Party newspaper, with the Burning Spear newspaper, and they're contending with the cops, The cops didn't know who they were until we told them. Not just that they were pigs, but they were political occupying army in our community all over. So that the police began to understand who themselves, what made it necessary for them to give a certain kind of ideological training to the police department is the Black liberation movement itself. These young people, they were contending because these dumb cops, they didn't know why they were there. They just want to beat up some niggas. That's why I'm here, right? And we explained to them who they were. And theory, ideology, politics is extremely important, and we have to accept it as important, not only take us in the world, but there's also a politic of organizing an organization that we have to accept also that will help us win. And if we use it, we will win. We will win. We know we can win because we've seen other people do it. Uhuru, yes, comrade, you're about to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you pretty much said it all, though, but that our ability to survive is directly linked to our ideological and philosophical position that the masses are going to make this revolution, and that's where we are supposed to be all the time, every day, 24/7. And one way we do that, I was thinking, you know, me myself, I met the party in 1974, and I met it through the Burning Spear newspaper. And I think maybe a little lady chairman showed up in Atlanta fighting over political prisoners. It to me, and we did not mention in your summation, I mean, in the study, the whole question of how the party has taken on not just political prisoners and prisoners of war, but the whole question of prisons. Before this woman come up with the mass incarceration thing, you party got a paper trail on the struggle against prisons, because at one time, you know, people were trying to make our organization a prisoners organization as opposed to prisoners. So we've been in this work a long time and always was taking it directly to the masses. One other thing here, in 1966, 68, when Black Panther Party and JOMO were organized, pretty much everything Uhuru P. Newton and Chairman Omali did was trial and error. They had no organization, no 50-year-old organization to come into that had structure, that had experience, because Malcolm was dead. Members, you know, people run out the country. Even before this, I'm talking about people like the guys, Negro with guns.
Yeah, right.
So we had no leadership right here on the ground. So we had to take it up on ourselves to, you know, to forge this thing, even ideological perspectives and stuff, because we had to clean up, you know, some of Malcolm's stuff on in Islam question. But we did it. So now we've got a 50-year organization for these young comrades who are coming into the movement now, you know, and can see the way forward, not a new neo-colonialist deal that's being set up with the Black Lives Matter movement, but an organization that's bent, they're bent on making this revolution and setting Black folks free. So that's what we're looking at here, and that's the way people need to, you know, view this party as this is the one that's going to do this thing.
I just wanted to say, Oteka, also is when you look at the Black is Back coalition, that's another example that can be given in terms of how the party, guerrilla never will make a frontal assault on a more powerful enemy. That's just asking for destruction and what happens. You wear it down, you hit it from different angles, and you know, you're like a ninja in many ways. You know, you make your enemy fight shadows, and you pave a way. You also create circumstances under which you're constantly involved in undermining the oppressor and then raising up the oppressed. And among the oppressed is Advanced Attachment, which is the African People's Socialist Party. That's an ongoing thing. And that's why, right now, some people don't quite get it, how we would be waging a struggle, just trying to win the whole concept of self-determination. The party is always talking about and struggling for communism, for the destruction of white power, for the liberation, the total liberation and unification of Africa. That's what it is that the party is about. But you just can't do that because the party wants to do it. We have to create conditions where masses of people are gravitating toward our direction and help forge the ability for us to do that. Even when we say massive people, sometimes we're talking about different kinds of organizations. When you look at the Black is Back Coalition, there's a reason why it's a coalition and not a single organization. It would be a single organization if everybody had absolute unity. They had organizational unity, or unity around organizational principles, unity around tactics and strategies, unity around theory, ideology, etc. And most instances, what you'll find is that there's some political unity that allows us the basis of putting everybody in the same camp. And the party leads this process, because the party is the party of the working class and can see the whole picture. Whereas you got different class forces who can only see their own interests. The African nation will never be liberated unless it is led by the African working class. So the African working class has an interest in the liberation of the total nation of our people, while different class forces, even if they talk about liberation, they are really interested in changing their own material interests. So they call it liberation, but they just want to be able to be the president of this country, or they just want to be able to get the newspaper, the pictures in the newspaper, or to get this bid on the latest thing that the government is offering for Negroes or something to that effect. But the party sees that if the nation is going to be free, right, then we have to utilize all these forces, put them in a common trajectory to liberate the whole nation. The party can see that. Only the working class has the ability to have a total view. The petty bourgeoisie can't see the whole thing, but we can't. And when I say can't see, I don't mean that there's some physical limitations. I'm talking about they're myopic because of their worldview. Their worldview revolves around making something happen within the context of the existing system. And that can only happen for them. It can't happen for everybody else. The party, for the workers to have what it needs, the whole nation's got to be free. So that's the significance of the party, and the party can organize this kind of coalition, that kind of coalition, recognizing that everybody in the nation is not inclined to go where the working class has to go, but damn it, as long as they're willing to push the goddamn car, then let's push the car till we get close enough where we don't have to have that kind of assistance. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's the thing, and that's the thing about having a party that's clear and conscious of its class interests, and the fact that it is the advanced attachment. And don't make the mistake either of saying that the party and the working class are the same. We are not the same. We are the advanced attachment. We are the general staff of the working class, because the working class without the leadership doesn't have a tendency to go where we're trying to go. It doesn't have access to the sciences. What our profession is. It's, just like you got handy people that K-Fing like to take his car all the time to these old jack of the trades, shade tree mechanics and shit. That's why they don't never work, right? But we are professions, our profession. So you don't take your car, if your car is good enough, you won't take it to the shade tree mechanic, right? You want somebody who has the training and skills to do that. And that's what we do. That's why we have these studies right now, because it's our profession to be able to lead it. So the majority of the workers won't be able to do that. That's why we have struggles sometimes with the workers, because the workers are not automatically conscious of what their own interests are. But once we help the working class to understand what their interests are, and that's not the most difficult thing in the world, because it is in their interest to be free. Their material interests, once they're informed of it, and see through us a certain kind of practice that clarifies it for them, the working class will take on this task and assume the responsibility as leaders and the new ruling class. Anybody else before we shut it down? Uhuru, Desun.
Yeah, my question was basically, throughout the years, what were some of the methods used in raising the consciousness as far as keeping the Black movement alive? I know the Burning Spirit played a huge role in being able to do that. And also, I'm sure after like certain actions, being able to sum up what it means to the African people. I just want to know if you can speak more as to what were some of the major things used in raising the consciousness of African people, getting them to understand that their freedom is right there.
Well, the major thing is cadre. There's nothing more significant than cadre. Cadre. People who have actually won to an understanding that the revolution and the party, that's the critical thing. And nothing more important than that. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Our relationships and all that stuff, which are wonderful all the time, but it's nothing more important than the party. And I say this without hesitation, because you can have, slaves can have relationships with each other. You can be a slave and damn, she fine. You understand? And you can have these great relationships on the plantation. But really, declaration of love is commitment to ending slavery for whomever it is that you say you love, right? Mm-hmm. So cadre is critical. And winning cadre, training cadre, and because the masses will respond to oppression. That's what we looked at. That's what happened in Ferguson. The problem in Ferguson is that we weren't there. The masses, when they say kill the police and start organizing, then it got hijacked by these Black Lives Matter people. Mm-hmm. The masses, the cadre is a critical thing. Cadre, armed with philosophy, armed with discipline, armed with organization, armed with an understanding of tactics and strategy. That's fundamental. That's the most fundamental thing. And to be among the people. And because I'm alive today because of that. And I mean this in a literal sense of the word, with the most recent example of that being when the police attacked this building that we are in now and tried to kill everybody in the building. And they locked some members of the party out of the building who didn't have to be told what to do. But when they rounded up with the helicopters and all this other stuff, party member cadre out there with the masses of the people understood what to do. Mm-hmm. And the people will respond to it. Look at what's happening in Tampa right now. It's an ongoing struggle around the murder of this brother there in Tampa, right? The masses will step forward, and especially our job is to keep the masses informed through instruments like the Burning Spear, Uhuru Radio, Black Power 96. These become instruments that we use. We have, all the other institutions that we have as a party, where you can find us, you can see us, even people in this city. This city probably has the most determined, militant African population you can find any place in the world in terms of willingness to fight. Actually get down with the state right here in this city right here. And they probably don't even know why, but for 50 years, since, talk about the mural taken down 50 years ago, there's never been a time where there hasn't been consistent political, ideological, organizational presence of some sort that's always doing stuff, so that you got generations of people who grew up with a certain kind of militancy, even if their children don't know where the hell it came from. You understand? Even if they might be Uncle Tom themselves today, but when they was back there, etc., this is what they've done. And so that stuff has been transmitted throughout the thing. So critical is cadre organization. That's the critical thing that we have. That's because the pig gonna be here. The pig's gonna be here until we drive them out. And that's what we have a responsibility to drive them out and to take charge of our own future and increasingly, and I'm going to end this shortly, but increasingly, what has to happen, the task that's before us, is winning the masses of our people to revolution. When I say that, I don't mean just to militancy, right? I mean to revolution, to African internationalism, to become communist with the understanding that the whole system has to be overturned by any means necessary, as Malcolm X said, but not even that ambiguously. That's what has to happen. Because we got a lot of people now in this ambiguous thing, being black. You know, people discover being black. But hell, I don't want to do that no more. I mean, I keep discovering blackness and what have you. And so that's the task, that's the upcoming task. And that's the thing that will, keep the revolution alive forever. And we have to build that among masses of African people, a certain kind of consciousness and recognition and understanding that revolution is good. Revolution is good. You understand? Because you can't have revolution unless the conditions are such that people cannot move forward without it, right? So, comrades, just to make sure, whose name did I not call? That's on the phone now. Is that someone whose name I didn't speak?
Uhuru, Chairman, Mike Love.
Mike Love. That's a great name, Mike Love, even if it is in English.
It's a dead name.
It's a dead name. Is it too much love? Uhuru. Anybody else? There's some questions. Who? Oh, Kafensi. Uhuru, come in. There's some other people who should be in this meeting and in this discussion. They're not here, and we know their names, many of them, and we should be finding out why. People need to get off their asses and participate in these studies. They're really important, and we're talking about people who are assuming really important roles in the movement. Now they need to be involved in these studies. So, comrades, I just want to remind us that we don't just do this to just consume information. We're building revolution and developing cadre to make this revolution. If you are not a member of the party, have not tried to become a member of the party, you should be, asking yourself, what in the hell is wrong with you? And you should really be going to, what is it they should go to, Ghazi?
Joinapsp.org.
Joinapsp.org and try to get your membership request in. And I'm saying this because you know how you hear about sales, and there's a limited thing associated with that, because the truth is that we are being bottlenecked by the numbers of people who are interested in coming into the revolution at this time. And you need to go ahead and come on into the struggle and stop messing around. And I also wanted to announce that on Tuesday at 6 o'clock here in St. Petersburg, Florida, there's going to be what's being characterized as a reception for me around the 50th anniversary of the removal of that mural that white people had up and enjoyed having up in the city of St. Petersburg, and all the Negroes act like they enjoyed it too until it was snatched down on December 29th, 1966. So there's going to be a meeting here. It's an important meeting because the city now is involved in a process where they pretend they want to replace that mural with something progressive, because that space has been blank for 50 years. There's nothing been up on that wall for 50 years, and they want to put something up there to really sort of cover up the evidence of the crime that they committed against our people. So that's going to be Tuesday at 6 o'clock, and anybody who's in the St. Petersburg, Florida area should come. It's going to be at Aquaba Hall at the Uhuru House, 1245 18th Avenue South. Then, of course, we have a really important convention that's happening in Ferguson. That's going to be on the 17th and the 18th and I'm going to be there. And I'm calling on everybody who can get there. You ought to be there too, because that's an NPDM convention, International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, and we're doing everything that we can to forward this whole revolutionary project. So that's going to be in Ferguson. It's going to be on the 17th and 18th, and Ferguson is a good place to be. You'll find out once you get there. It's a great place to be. There's a lot of recent history that's there, and people are still trying to sort it out. And our party has played an important role in making that happen. Throughout October, they're going to be between the last of September, the first week of October, there are going to be a series of statewide conventions. One being held in St. Petersburg, I think on September 1st, on October 1st, and another will be held in Kansas City, Missouri, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Huntsville, Alabama, in Houston, Texas, in what have I left out? Somebody said New York, in New Jersey, in Missouri, and so there are going to be a series of them, statewide conventions that are preparing us for the national convention, Black People's Convention, that's going to be held in Washington, D.C. on November 5th and 6th. And this convention is where we will unveil the national Black political agenda for self-determination. On November 5th, we're going to have a rally at Malcolm X Park. And that's the first day of the convention. It will consist of the rally at Malcolm X Park, where we are looking forward to African people being able to talk, people who've been victimized, terrorized, brutalized by white power. The white people just had their 2 conventions, major conventions. Now we're going to have hours and hours of convention of resistance. That's why it's going to be a rally at Malcolm X Park, and we want people to come. And then we're going to march on the White House on that day. And then after that march, across the street from the White House, we're going to have another rally at Lafayette Park. And we'll do a similar thing. And then on the next day, it's indoors at Howard University at Blackburn Center and Auditorium, and where we'll talk with some kind of details around the 19 points that constitute the national Black political agenda for self-determination. So people should, have all of this on your calendar, and let's go ahead and take it on. And also in October, as I mentioned, there will be a series of days in solidarity with African people that's going to be sponsored by Uhuru Solidarity Movement under the leadership of the African People Solidarity Committee. So all of this stuff, it's going to be an incredible period. It's an incredible period for our movement right now. And everybody should be organizing to get to as many of these events, conferences, and conventions as I've just mentioned. Is there anything else that needs to be talked about?
Uhuru.
Yes, Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru?
Uhuru.
Yes.
Comrade,
Yes, Comrade, go ahead.
we wanted to make an announcement for the book fair in Philadelphia.
Okay, talk about the book fair in Philadelphia.
All righty. So the African People's Education and Defense Fund here in Philly, we are having our second annual Uhuru Book Fair and Flea Market with our keynote speaker, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. The date is September 24th. It's going to be a really, really powerful program where, we're addressing the disparities in education in the Philadelphia public school system. And, we're deepening the discussion in terms of, education and the lack of resources and disparities in the African community. We are encouraging everyone to come out. It's going to be an amazing day. It's from 9 to 5. The location is in Clark Park, and that's in 43rd and Chester Avenue, Southwest Philadelphia. It's actually on the Burning Spear website. It's part of the carousel. And in the Burning Spear newspaper, we have a full-page color ad in the back.
People should go to that. That's an amazing event. We have and have had for a number of years at Clark Park in Philly. The African, do we characterize as marketplace? Is that how it's characterized? How is it characterized?
Well, we have a dual structure for that particular day.
Right.
So April through October, we had the African marketplace. We had the Uhuru flea market.
Right.
But in the structure between April and October, we had 2 large-scale events. So the first one is the health festival, and we have that every April. And then there's the book fair in September, October.
Right on.
But with the Uhuru flea market, we put out the message of self-determination, through economic development, which is one of our pillars under APDS. It's going to be over 100 vendors, independent African vendors. It's going to be an amazing day.
That's one of the real services I think we pay in the sense that it provides really income for more than 100 African vendors set up there. And I love being out there too, just in terms of, it's nothing like an African market, you know what I mean? Anything else, comrades?
Yes.
Yes.
Uhuru, I just wanted to remind everybody to order their spears. You can do so at burningspearmarketplace.com. You can also set up a recurring order on that site so I don't have to call you every month and remind you. So that's all I wanted to say. Order your spears.
And I'm looking at Comrade Gaza right now, and I know he's thinking about it, that, especially all of the new party forces, that you have a quota of spears that you're supposed to be dealing with, and it's going to be important for you to do that. Anybody else? Any other announcement?
Hello, Chairman, this is Timber.
Yes, Timber.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the announcement to all movement leaders and all organizations within the movement that you can submit your event on theburningspear.com. So if you have any events that's coming up and you want the African nation to know, just submit it on theburningspear.com.
Uhuru. All right, brothers and sisters, thank you so much. Our next study, and we'll be getting it out to you if you don't already have it, will be chapter 3 of this Izwe Letu Africa, and it is titled "Surviving the Counter-Insurgency." So 8 o'clock Sunday, next Sunday. Let's do it again. Uhuru.